If you've ever contemplated buying a tube amp, or maybe you've already got a tube amp and you've ever looked at tubes, you'll know that it can be really challenging to work out which tubes are the best ones to buy. Should you buy new old stock tubes or brand new production tubes? Can you get as good sound from brand new production tubes as you can from some of the old classic NOS tubes? It's a little bit of a minefield. And so it's really cool to start seeing some brands now bring out premium tubes. There's tubes like the PS Vane tubes, the Sophia electric tubes, there's a few out there now, and we've got a brand new player in the market in the form of the Apos Ray. Now, as is the case with most of these tubes, these are going to be produced by one of the factories that produces lots of different brands of tubes. But the key difference is the specifications and the tolerances that are used to produce the different tubes. So let's jump in and take a look at whether the Apos Ray tubes can give you a premium, high-quality option for a brand new production tube, or whether it's still better to go out and hunt for one of those unique and really special new old stock tubes.
Averiguando qué hacer por la noche. Entonces entras en mi cuarto pa' ver. Levántate mi amor, hoy vamos a beber. Ponte algo sexy, bebé.
Now, I should quickly mention, if you're not familiar with the term new old stock, when you go around looking at tubes, one of the things you might be able to find are tubes marked as NOS or new old stock. What that actually means is they were produced years and years ago, often back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and they've been stuck in a warehouse somewhere in a box and someone's come across a huge batch of them. What often happens then is that stock is purchased by someone in bulk, they then go through and test them and find tubes that are closely matched and then resell them at a premium as matched pairs. In my experience, you can get some wonderful NOS tubes and you don't always have to spend a fortune on them. But the challenge is it's a bit of a lucky dip as to whether or not you're going to get a great tube or just an okay one. As a case in point, I've got two tubes here. This one is a 6SN7 RCA tube. This one's a 6SN7 Kenrad tube. I paid a similar amount for both of them, but this Kenrad tube is way better than the RCA. And the only way I was going to find out was by trawling through lots and lots of posts online to try to find out which of the different variants of different tubes sounded better or worse, or by buying it and giving it a go. And so that's where the challenge and also the fun of new old stock tubes comes in. But if you're like me and you're a bit stretched for time, you might actually prefer to know that you can go out and buy a good quality new production tube. And sometimes that's possible, sometimes that's not. I've got here on my desk some brand new JJ 12AU7s and also some Electroharmonix 12AU7s. And so they're both new production tubes, and I wanted to put those as well as some nice NOS tubes up against the brand new Apos Rays. So with all that preamble out of the way, let me introduce the Rays to you. At this stage, as far as I'm aware, the Rays are only available in the 12AU7 variant. Hopefully there'll be new ones to come, assuming you like the sound of what I've got to say here. But what you get when you buy the Rays is a pair of matched 12AU7 tubes. And there are lots and lots of amps on the market that use the 12AU7 as an input tube. You can also use these anywhere you see a 12AT7 or a 12AX7. They're also interchangeable with ECC82. That's actually the same tube, just with a different code attached to it, depending on where it's made, I believe. And so they're a really commonly used and commonly available tube. If you're looking at buying a set of the Rays, what you're paying is $180. That's the list price. Although when I did my research for this, they were actually selling at $150. So hopefully it's going to be $150 and it's going to get you a matched pair of 12AU7s. Inside the little box they come in, and it's really nice packaging, protects the tubes really well. There's a little booklet in there too. And then you get your two 12AU7 tubes in here. Other than the fact that these are a matched pair, which by the way means that their output levels have been carefully tested to make sure they're going to give you the same output levels in an amplifier circuit, there's not a lot more I can tell you about the Apos Ray tubes. They're a nice looking tube. As you'd expect for new production, they're lovely and clean and fresh. They've got gold printing on them that gives you the Apos logo on one side and it says Ray 12AU7 on the other. Which side's facing out of your amplifier is going to depend on the design of your amp. And then the pins down the bottom are also gold plated, which can potentially improve things by preventing corrosion. If you do ever buy yourself, or you've bought in the past, new old stock tubes, you may often find that the pins coming out are quite corroded and dark. I've never had huge issues with contacts from those sorts of tubes, but it is something to be aware of. The gold plating should theoretically improve the long-term life and contact capability of those pins. But beyond that, there's really not a lot to say. They're a 12AU7 tube, they're going to plug in where any other 12AU7 tube plugs in, And so the question then comes down to, has the production levels of performance, tolerances, etc. resulted in a better sound than what you can get from cheaper brand new tubes or some other NOS tubes? And so the easiest way for me to review these was just to run through some different tubes and tell you what I heard. And for all this testing, I was using the Elekit TU8200R amplifier. That's a DIY kit. I've upgraded mine a fair bit. If you want to know more about it, I'll put a card here and I'll try and remember to put links in the description down below through to the TU8200R reviews. But the key thing to know is that I was using it in the TU8200R, which is a high quality speaker and headphone amp. All of my testing was done across both headphones and speakers, and the results I found were pretty consistent on both. Of course, you're always going to get synergies between different headphones, speakers, DACs, etc. So the right tube for me could be different to the right tube for you depending on what you're listening through, but hopefully I can paint you a picture now of what to expect with the Apos Ray and how it compares to these others. Starting off with a pair of very basic JJ's tubes. These are just a bog stock 12AU7. They're provided stock in a lot of different kits and a lot of different amplifiers. And if you're to go online and buy a pair of these and a matched pair again, you're going to be spending about $45. So significantly less, about a third of the price of the Apos Rays at the pricing of $150 that they were at when I did my research for this review. And in comparing the two, and obviously it's a little bit tricky because you've got to switch off the amp, let it cool down, unplug the tubes, plug in the next one, switch it back on again. But doing it as fast as I safely could, it was very evident to me that the Apos Ray was a major step up from the JJs. As they should be. The JJs, as I said, they're a very basic entry-level type tube. What I specifically heard from the Apos Rays, though, was a much cleaner, tighter image and a sparklier, more detailed top end. They didn't get splashy or harsh or treble emphasized. It was just more detailed, more refined, and a bit more sparkly up top. There was less roll-off of the treble compared to the JJs. And so I'm not going to dwell on the JJs versus Apos Ray comparison so much. It was a really clear and easy win over the Rays. And so instead I decided to step things up a bit. One of my other favourite 12AU7 tubes that's also brand new stock is the 12AU7 from Electroharmonix, and specifically the gold pin variety. So if I open these up, and you do notice immediately the difference in packaging, these basic cardboard boxes up against the really nice packaging of the Rays. Now I know that doesn't matter a great deal, but it will protect the tube a little bit better in shipping. And so then you get a really nice looking little tube. Again, it's brand new stock, so it's clean and fresh. They've also got the gold pins, just like the Rays do. And a matched pair of these will set you back about $61. So we're still talking half the price of the Rays at the reduced, what may have been a sale price. But in both cases, we're getting a lovely gold pin 12AU7. When I did my same listening tests, jumping back and forth between these, there was still some significant difference to be heard. The Electroharmonix have a slightly thicker sound than the Rays, and it's something I like about the Electroharmonix. They've got quite a tubey sound. And what I mean by that is that they've got a fairly rich, warm mid and mid-bass tonality. They've got a bit of extra weight down there, a bit of extra heft, but they're nicely detailed as well. I found that the Electroharmonix gave almost as good of an image as the Apos Rays, but the Rays did still come out a little bit ahead, probably because of the tonality shifting more towards an overall neutral balance from the Rays compared to the slightly thicker feel from the Electroharmonix. What was also clear was that the Rays brought a better sense of energy to the music. Again, that slightly sparkly top end, and not in any way harsh or nasty, just a more kind of detailed and evident and present top end. That for me gave the Rays just a little bit more kind of energy and life in the music. I can definitely see some people preferring the Electroharmonix for that slightly thicker and richer sound. But for me, as I went back and forth between the Electroharmonix and the Apos Rays, time and time again, it was definitely the Rays I enjoyed more. And that was, as I said before, with a combination of speakers and headphone listening. My DAC for all this testing was the Chord Hugo TT2, so that was a pretty lean and neutral DAC. And I was driving the Harbath P3 ESR XDs, and also from memory the Focal Utopia 2022, which I've got the review coming soon, by the way. And I wanted to specify the source chain that I was using now, just to make sure people are really clear when I'm talking about the Apos Ray being a sparkly tube. That source chain I was just talking about, both the speakers and the headphones with the DAC, is not a warm or rich source chain. It's not as though there's some synergy going on where the source chain is rich and so a sparkly tube is helping. It's actually a very neutral chain in both cases, and that goes to show that they're not an overly bright tube. They're lovely and detailed and balanced from bass all the way through to treble with no specific emphasis. The key thing for me is that they don't have the roll-off of some of the other tubes, but they don't really have an enhancement in the treble so much as a really nice tonality from bottom to top. Having said that, I was running them with a set of EL34s, they're Mullard new production EL34s, and I'll share with you shortly a test that I did to make sure they weren't too bright with different tubes. And by that I mean different power tubes in the secondary socket. So most tube amps will have input tubes like these that provide the gain, and then power tubes to give the voltage to drive the headphones. So stick with me, I'll come back around and talk about how they paired with some brighter, more energetic tubes in just a moment. But before we get there, I also want to talk about my testing of these up against a NOS tube that I really love. As I sort of alluded to before, when you go hunting for NOS tubes, you can spend anything from $30 to $40 for a matched pair, all the way up into the hundreds. One of the sets of tubes I have here that I particularly enjoy in the TU8200R is a set of NOS Philips tubes. These are listed as JAN5814A tubes, they're still a 12AU7 variant. And I don't actually remember what I spent for them, but I know they were an affordable but not a super duper cheap NOS tube. So they were probably in the vicinity of $80 odd US, I'm guessing. I've consistently preferred the Philips over either of the JJs or the Electroharmonix tubes in every situation I've used them in, and going between the NOS Philips tubes and the Rays, I was really impressed to hear the Rays continue to outshine the competition. I didn't really expect this, I actually expected the NOS tubes to be just a little bit better than the new production ones. But these Apos Ray tubes sounded absolutely brilliant. The margin was closer with the NOS tubes than it was with either of the new production tubes, but the Rays still clearly came out in front. Specifically what I was hearing was that the soundstage from the Rays was larger, there was better imaging and more space between sounds. Not a huge margin, but clearly and definitely more space overall and in between everything. And there was also a bit more detail and resolution as well. So for me, the Rays absolutely cemented themselves as a brilliant new production tube. They're certainly not cheap. At $150 US, they're an expensive tube. But if you've got yourself an expensive headphone or speaker amplifier, keep in mind that the tubes are a very, very big part of what produces the sound and the quality of the sound, because the signal travels right through these and is amplified by them. So spending and investing a bit on tubes for a quality headphone amplifier is absolutely worthwhile. I'm not suggesting you should put these in a headphone amplifier for say $100 or $200, but if you've gone out and spent $1,000 or more on a headphone amp or a speaker amp, or a preamp for that matter, then you should absolutely consider spending this sort of money on a set of tubes to get the most out of it, assuming they're good and the Apos Rays are. But the final question that I had, and I did mention this before, was did the Apos Rays sound so good just because I had them matched up with the EL34s? The EL34s are fairly rich and lush through the mid-range, and so I was a bit concerned all of a sudden that maybe I'd actually just accidentally given them a leg up by pairing them with the perfect match for them. And so what I did was I removed the EL34s and I grabbed a set of new old stock KT88 Shugguang Black Treasures. These are a very dynamic tube. Any of the KT88s tend to be. They're quite forward, they're quite dynamic, they can be a bit too energetic sometimes. And so I thought if anything was going to bring out the worst of the Apos Rays, it would be these KT88s. So I plugged them in, I fired up some tracks, I think it was all speaker listening for this one, and I listened to the Apos Rays with the KT88s and then through the Harvest again. What I heard as I listened was again some wonderful sound. I was really impressed with the Apos Rays. Once again, they were crisp, they were clean, very well defined in terms of imaging, resolution and detail. And the good news was that there's absolutely no harshness in their treble. They've got that beautiful sparkly, detailed treble, but it doesn't come with any sense of emphasis or exaggeration. And so even with a dynamic and, I wouldn't go so far as forceful, but kind of in your face a little bit tube in a KT88, I thought the Apos Rays sounded absolutely fantastic. And so this is one of those rare reviews where I don't really have anything negative to say. I can't find any cons or any negatives for the Apos Rays other than the fact that they're going to be more expensive than some people want to spend, and I totally get that. As I said before, these are tubes for someone that has spent a lot on a tube amplifier. These are not tubes for someone that's just spent a couple of $100. But if you've gone out there and you've invested in an amplifier that you intend to keep, whether it's a preamp, headphone amp, or a speaker amp, if you've invested a significant amount of money in an amplifier that uses 12AU7s and you want to get the most out of it, I absolutely think you should consider getting the Apos Rays. I'm incredibly impressed. As I said, I can't really find anything negative to say, and that's very unusual. I don't ever go looking for negatives in terms of my reviews. I try to balance, but I can't even balance this one because they're that good. I've got nothing bad to say. And so if you're in the market for 12AU7s and you do have the budget to spend $150 to $180, then jump over to Apos and check out the Apos Ray. As always, I'll put links down below in the description. These are affiliate links, and I appreciate any and all support that I get from people using the links in my videos. It's a huge help and support for a relatively small channel like mine. And if you've bought a set of Apos Rays or you go out and buy some as a result of this review, then do drop a comment down below and let us know how you're finding them. Are you enjoying them as much as I have? I hope you are. And so for now, let's wrap things up. I hope you found this video useful, helpful, and informative. If you have, please hit the like button, and also subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave you to the music. Happy tube rolling, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.